RP X, RP Peep, RP Mac. You ain't having no relax, this shit got me tearing up.
What's good, y'all? I'm Jared. Today I'm about to check out 10 wrestlers who should have been WWE Champion. Man, this is a 3-year-old video, so I know it's kind of out. The people on this list gonna be kind of outdated, but I can name some people off the top of my head, such as Shelton Benjamin, Cesaro, John Morrison. Who else? Adrian Neville, Sami Zayn, Shinsuke Nakamura, and the list goes on and on and on. So let's check out this video. This video is by Cultaholic Wrestling. So let's hop into it.
Over the years, we've seen WWE champions who were good and WWE champions who were not so good. Yeah. But there's only one, or sometimes two, as the case is right now, WWE World Champions at any one time. So the likelihood that every great wrestler gets the chance to hold the company's biggest title is small. Math is fun. As such, many WWE wrestlers never get to hold the company's most sought-after prize, whether it be because of being around at a time when a popular champion was at the height of their powers and locked into a prolonged title reign, or because of backstage politics or company direction. Some legends, of course, never got to hold the WWE Championship because of their allegiances to other companies, most famously Sting as a member of the WCW roster and Jerry Lawler's loyalty to the Memphis territory. But these are not the names we'll be looking at today. Instead, we'll be counting down 10 outstanding wrestlers based on their in-ring acumen, memorable personalities, and their legendary careers inside of the WWE. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and these are 10 wrestlers who should have been WWE Champion. Join us. Number 10, the British Bulldog. The British Bulldog was a standout competitor of his generation and on some occasions was given a spotlight arguably bigger than that of the WWE title. His SummerSlam 1992 main event Intercontinental title win being the most memorable. During his legendary career, he won just about everything that there was to win, even duplicating Shawn Michaels' performance in the 1995 Royal Rumble by starting the match alongside the Heartbreak Kid and finishing as runner-up in the bout as one of two last men standing, proving his physical prowess and showing the faith the company had in him to tell stories and perform. But even with such an amount of faith, he never won the WWE title. Really? It's a shame on a number of levels, not least for Bulldog himself, who was talented, had a gimmick that could get over just about anywhere despite its clear national allegiance, and was a legend in his own right. But what really makes this a misstep on the WWE's part was that if you were to look through the annals of WWE history, Bulldog is undeniably the English wrestler most deserving of the honour of being the nation's first WWE champion. Okay. And here we are some 15 years after his final appearance with the company, still waiting an Englishman sitting upon the throne. Come on, William Regal, come back full time. Number 9, Ted DiBiase.
DiBiase never won the world title?
Ted DiBiase was. He flaunted his wealth, owned a glorified slave character, hired other wrestlers to fight his fights, and even taunted little kids from the crowd with fake games. Dick, but because it's wrestling, we love him all the more for it. DiBiase as a heel was as convincing and spectacular as they come, his work, his look, and his moveset elevating the gimmick above the base material and into legendary status. Unlike everyone else on this list, DiBiase did actually hold the WWE title, though not officially. It was in 1988 that DiBiase paid Andre the Giant to fight Hulk Hogan for the WWF title, and then paid off the referee to count Hogan's shoulders down for the pin, taking the title from Hogan after 4 years. Andre, who was at the time on DiBiase's payroll, then gifted the belt to DiBiase, making him a WWE champion.
So he never officially won the title.
Unfortunately for DiBiase, money couldn't buy him everything, and it seemed like the WWE title was one of those things. The on-screen authority presence of the time, known as the WWE president Jack Tunney, stripped the belt from DiBiase and he was never able to reclaim it. It was one of the best uses of character in WWE history and as iconic as the $1 Million Man character itself, but it teased a reality in which he was able to reach the pinnacle of his career at the height of his popularity, a reality we would never get to witness in his many active years to follow, despite his clear and obvious talents in the ring and as a performer. Number 8, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Paul Orndorff was a hugely influential and talented wrestler who was never WWE Champion because of the unfortunate circumstances of his time in the company. Those circumstances being the rise of Hulk Hogan and the resulting Hulkamania run of the 80s. A solid ring hand with a phenomenal physique who was sold across territories in the early 80s, Orndorff is perhaps best remembered by fans of today as one of the main event wrestlers from WrestleMania 1, in which he partnered with Roddy Piper against Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. But that match was just the tip of the iceberg as regards to Orndorff's feud with Hulk Hogan, which spanned for many years as Vince McMahon promoted his two larger-than-life idols across a multitude of venues on a variety of platforms in the early days of his tenure as WWE owner. Earning a WWE Hall of Fame spot in 2005, Orndorff was celebrated for his contributions to the company, but was left feeling the absence of WWE gold in his career, just as many of his contemporaries of the era were. Damn you, Hulk Hogan. Number 7, Rick Rude. As iconic of an 80s wrestler as there is, Rick Rude's arrogance and overall showboat attitude made him a huge star in the late 80s and early 90s as the sort of heel wanker who could steal your girlfriend and then beat you up just for questioning it. He was as cartoonish as many of the characters of the day, and much of what he did was ahead of its time, with his tights being particularly revolutionary. In the ring, every element of his game was geared towards building his character, as was the case with many wrestlers in his era, and thus his work seemed methodical and showboaty, but this was just the tip of the iceberg for Rude. As a wrestler, he was vastly underrated, and as a character, he was so memorable that it's almost shocking
Dolph Ziggler,
that he
another
never
one, even though he won the world title.
Championship. Number 6, Razor Ramon.
Razor never won a title?
aka Razor Ramon was a person who helped to revolutionize the wrestling industry upon his arrival in WCW as part of the Outsiders with Kevin Nash. But the work he did in WWE as Razor Ramon was equally as memorable, with some of his greatest moments coming to define the future vision of the wrestling industry for years to come. He's perhaps best remembered in the WWE for his series of matches with Shawn Michaels, including their iconic Intercontinental title feud that featured their famous ladder matches. Or perhaps his surprise loss to the 1-2-3 Kid on Raw. The fact that these iconic moments from his career came in the ring, as opposed to in a promo or at the culmination of a story, speaks volumes as to his quality as a wrestler and his ability to tell great stories between the ropes. Hall, whether playing an exaggerated version of himself or his famed Razor Ramon gimmick, had WWE Champion written all over him. It was just never to be. Unlike the majority of picks on this list, who were perhaps victims of their style of wrestling being different to the major stars of the time in which they became famous, Hall was actually a perfect fit for his era, but never reached the top courtesy of his own decision to jump from WWE to WCW early on in the Monday Night Wars, and a heap of circumstances surrounding the WWE's
I think they started the Monday Night Wars
prior. Even so, he remains a wrestler with one heck of a WWE legacy, who should have been WWE Champion at some stage in his career. Number 5, Mr. Perfect. Quite how Mr. Perfect
heavily underrated
never became WWE
so underrated
is somewhat of a mystery. In an era of transition from muscle-bound stars of the late 80s to the trimmed-down, more athletic and technically sound wrestlers of WWE's new generation in the early 90s, the industry seemed ripe for the picking for Perfect in amongst the likes of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. Unfortunately, it never came to pass. Despite being lifted to the lofty heights of being IC champion and the man to vanquish Ric Flair from WWE TV, Perfect was never given the opportunity to represent the company as its central-most champion, ripping away from us the potentially great championship reign that he could have had, and leaving his legacy lacking that one crown.
His son could have been champion too. They would have given him a push.
Different level. Number 4, Owen Hart. No doubt about it, Owen Hart was taken from us too soon. Yet still, the fact that such a talented ring technician with unparalleled in-ring psychology and an openness to trying new things in the name of garnering a reaction never became WWE Champion is absolutely absurd. The younger of the two most famous Hart relatives, Owen Hart personified the hard-working and always reliable mantra of the Hart dynasty, becoming one of the most consistent performers in the early to mid-90s WWE. His legacy in the ring is perhaps best defined by his work opposite Bret Hart, but it was the overall body of work Owen produced that made him an all-time great. The sort of wrestler that would have been WWE Champion in any other era, and certainly an outstanding wrestler who should have been WWE Champion during his prime. Number 3, Ricky Steamboat. What Steamboat lacked in authentic sounding
Intercontinental Champion,
more than made up
legend,
for his wrestling ability. The Dragon was one of his era's greatest in-ring technicians and an undoubted legend of the industry. His match with Macho Man Randy Savage at WrestleMania 3 remains to this day an all-time favourite for wrestling purists and fellow professional wrestlers the world over, and his series opposite Ric Flair in WCW was the stuff of legend. In WWE, he was always a prominently featured name, but whether it be his size or his skills on the mic, he was never afforded the opportunity to quite make it to the pinnacle of the WWE mountain, which is a shame for all of us because Steamboat was a man of immense skill who deserved the recognition.
Okay.
Number 2, Jake Roberts. Jake Roberts was a vicious snake of a heel. He was the sort of heel fans wouldn't dare to imagine as WWE Champion, and perhaps that's the reason why he was never given the role on WWE programming. Even so, it remains somewhat mysterious in the contemporary era of champion after champion that a man with the overall wrestling talent of Jake Roberts never reached the top of the WWE, that he was never the WWE Champion. As a character, he was one of the most memorable of his era, and he was years ahead of his contemporaries in terms of character presentation and his work on the mic. What's more is that he was utterly believable and had a finishing move that was so well protected that every time he hit his famous DDT, it was expected to finish the match. When we look back at some of the all-time greats of the industry, Roberts is certainly one many assume must have been champion at one stage or another because of his overall influence. But he unfortunately never was. If only he had come around 10 or so years later. Number 1, Rowdy Roddy Piper. The greatest overall product the wrestling industry has ever seen not reach the top of the mountain is without a doubt Rowdy Roddy Piper. The legendary 80s
Hot Rod never won a championship either.
Across media platforms in Hollywood saw him reach levels of popularity rivaled by only a few very exclusive names in wrestling history. Was undoubtedly one of the best.
People legitimately hated Roddy Piper because of his character.
In the ring too. Piper was the sort of wrestler who could talk them out
protection. He had to move into like a secluded area,
his work on the mic
so fans couldn't find him.
Was unparalleled during his prime in the mid-80s, and as such saw him main event the very first WrestleMania, as well as become a heavily promoted name in the years that followed. In the ring, his finest hour perhaps came against Bret Hart at WrestleMania 8 in a match that is vastly underrated but remains an absolute classic of in-ring psychology from two masters of the game. If ever there was a wrestler who should have been WWE Champion, it was Roddy Piper. Unfortunately for him and us, he was perhaps just a bit too short to be the face of Vinnie Mac's company at the time, and there was always that irresistible force that was Hulk Hogan as the company's champion. Piper was always a deserving WWE star who became the victim of circumstances and the era to which he was born. But given his talents and his overall appeal, there's no doubting that he remains the most outstanding wrestler to never be the WWE Champion to this
That's
very
crazy.
day.
I did not know that.
So that's our list. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and you can follow me on Twitter here. If you enjoy what we do here at Cultaholic, you can pledge to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most
Alright, y'all, great video, man. I did not know Mr. Perfect. Well, I knew Mr. Perfect. I did not know Ricky Steamboat, Roddy Piper, and I think British Bulldog or somebody else, and Jake Roberts and Rabbits and Rick Rude. I did not know they didn't become WWE Champion. They had the talent. Like WWE, even back then, could not see that they had legitimately great talented wrestlers on the roster. It's crazy that they still do the same thing to this day. They overlook so many great wrestlers over the big guys who they think could draw a good crowd. And back then, Hulk Hogan was like the top guy, so Hogan was not gonna give his spot up at all. But let me know what y'all thought of the video, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.